You're listening to the What's Happening podcast with Gary Watts.
Good morning. I'm here with Jack Tank with Ag Risk Insurance and Land Management, and we're here to talk about agriculture, farming communities, farmers, all kinds of things. When I was thinking about inviting Jack to the podcast, I thought Iowa's 85% agriculture, our economy. Why wouldn't we want to talk about agriculture? So anyway, good morning, Jack.
Good morning.
How are you?
I made it. I'm all good and ready to go. And it's planting season in Iowa, so
Good.
everybody's thinking about when's they can put corn and beans in the ground.
Good. How was your trip over here on First Avenue? They got that blocked off.
So far, I went the back way.
You went the back way. You're smart.
Yeah,
So-
I went the back way.
Well, let's talk about agriculture. Let's talk about whatever you want to talk about. Past. We could go into the present and the future. But let's talk about the past in agriculture.
I grew up on a livestock farm, sharecrop livestock farm in Durant, Iowa. My folks basically raised corn, beans, cattle, hogs. I was cheap Chinese labor, Gary.
How many acres?
It was smaller, about 300,
Okay.
give or take. And then we had a good amount of pasture, and we had beef cattle, probably up to 120, 130 cows. And then we raised hogs in the field, which is different completely than it is now. We basically raised hogs twice a year out in huts. And we were lucky at that time to get 7 pigs per litter. That was considered good. So if you have 100 sows, you had 700 pigs. Today's world, it's, one sow in a confinement situation can throw off 30 pigs per year.
Wow.
So when you look in the past, I probably had my 10,000 hours in by the time I was 15 or 16. They always say professionally, you need to have your 10,000 hours in to be a professional in an area.
At 50 cents an hour, right?
Not
Or-
quite.
Not quite. Okay.
I never received a check for anything I did until I was in a sophomore in college because I was trade labor. Somebody needed some help, go over and do it. They would come and help us at times. And so it wasn't a situation where I was earning any cash, but I was driving silage wagons, taking care of cattle, helping with the hog situation, anything like that. So I grew up in production agriculture. I knew that when I was probably in 6th grade, 7th grade, I was going to be an Aggie. I was going to go to Iowa State, no questions. I was going to be involved in some production agriculture. And I had quite a bit of experience because I was on a livestock farm. And so I worked for the ruminant nutrition farm at Iowa State, hauled manure, chopped stalks, vaccinated cattle, did all kind of things for Dr. Vetter up there. And so, like I said, I had my 10,000 hours in by the time I was probably 16. By the time I was through college in production agriculture, I'd been around it, I don't know, probably 15, 20,000 hours of working time by that time.
Tell us what production agriculture is. Some people may not know what that is.
Yeah, that's a good question. Production agriculture is going to be the mainstays in this state of corn, beans, cattle, hogs, chickens. Iowa is the number 1 egg state. Iowa is the number 1 hog state. Iowa and Illinois fight back and forth on number 1 for corn and beans. One thing people forget in this state is, we drive by field after field of corn, and Iowa is a corn deficit state.
What's that mean?
Corn deficit means we are actually bringing corn into Iowa more than we are exporting it.
Because of ethanol?
And cattle and hogs and chickens
Really?
and eggs. So we have a tremendous number of raw product brought in to a value add. So we are in a situation that we are actually bringing not beans. It's going to change. We'll discuss that in a little bit. But we are bringing a lot of raw material into Iowa to feed livestock.
Huh. Where do we get our corn?
Comes from Nebraska, Missouri,
Really?
Illinois. But we mostly raise our corn here, but we aren't exporting in total acres and bushels. We are using it here in the state, which is great. This is what we should be doing.
Yeah. So back to production when you were a kid. Farmers back then used to, have row crop, but then again, they'd feed that to the cattle and the hogs or whatnot. We don't do as much as that anymore. We can get to that.
Mm-hmm.
But tell me again what production is. The whole realm, you raise the crops, you feed it to the animals,
Mm-hmm.
you raise the animals. Is that it?
Well, when I was growing up, my dad didn't have any beans because we had cattle on feed and a livestock. My dad was a cattle feeder, and his thought was you raise corn to feed the cattle.
Yeah.
And so you had a situation there that he was a livestock person. He just loved to feed cattle and be around cattle. We raised hogs for the mortgage lifters. It's not as romantic in the hog business as the cattle business, Gary.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple. People raised hogs because they made decent money, and they could then afford to have ground and afford to buy other things. Cattle is a little longer term situation, and the cattle feeders are just a different group. It's a bit of a disease. Once you start, you can't stop. It's kind of being real estate, Gary.
Yeah.
It's about that bad.
Yeah.
But
It's hard to stop.
it's hard to stop. That's right.
Or when do you stop?
The cattle thing is such a long cycle. When do you stop, Gary? I don't know when you're too old to lift a bale any longer.
What's the market like today with cattle?
The cattle market is right now is phenomenal because we've had a complete disaster in the South with no rain for many areas of Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, and so we've had herds dispersed down there, and so right now the cattle business right now is highly profitable.
So give me an example, because a lot of people, when we're talking, a lot of people aren't as exposed to agriculture, so they need to kind of go basic. So let's say a cow has a calf,
Mm-hmm.
and the calf is a baby, and they raise it up. What can you make on a calf, and then you sell it eventually, generally speaking, or right now?
Well, right now is an exception. It would be a bit too much. Remember that let's talk cattle right now. Most people do not actually raise all the calves and then feed them themselves.
Right.
Most people are segmented, either cattle feeder, bigger boys, or you're a cow calf person. So a cow calf person typically, I would say, is trying to make a couple $100 on a cow calf operation per pair. That maybe a little bit more than that. So you've got to run 200 to 300 head for
Yeah.
sure if you're going to make it viable. But there's a tremendous number of smaller cow calf operations in Iowa just to be able to use some hay and a little bit of pasture.
So cow calf is the cow has the calf,
Right.
and then you sell the calf eventually
Correct.
to
Somebody else,
okay,
and he'll go ahead and feed it out to
feed it out.
13 to 1,500 pounds, and
Then what do they make?
that's super variable. That is a situation that some years you might make $300, and the next year you'll lose $100. So that's the big boys game, and the long term people use hedge programs and have quite a bit of cash in the bank because you have to have a stomach for it because the prices can roll around.
Tell us about the futures in the hog and cattle in any market, corn, beans. I mean, a lot of people don't understand what in the world are you talking about when you're buying futures.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. I might digress here a little bit because in the livestock market, the corn market, the bean market, all have had their ups and downs over the years. Going back a little bit, let's talk about what happened in the 90s with the hog business, which I'm very familiar with. We insure a goodly number of hog sites around the country or the buildings themselves. There were many independent operators in Iowa in the 90s and the early 90s. And the late 90s, prices dropped because shackle space was very short. Now, the shackle space is when you're in the processing plants. If there's not enough space, you have too many hogs, they don't have to pay anything for it because they only have so much space. And so in the late 90s, their shackle space was limited, and hogs were down to $8 to $10 a hundredweight, which is way below cost of production. So we saw a massive change in production agriculture in the 90s in the hog business. So a lot of people my age at that time went ahead and did custom feeding, and so we had people like Smithfield Foods or JBS, which are the packers, actually own the pigs now. And so growers are on a contract basis because the price was too volatile on the futures price, and they couldn't stomach those wide swings when they're working off the futures prices. And so now probably 85% of the livestock is fed on a custom basis in Iowa for hogs. In the cattle market, there are a ton of independent cow-calf people in Iowa yet that still have calves and sell the calves then to somebody else who feeds them out. So that's a good amount of that. In the chicken business, we have a lot of contract feeding now because it was so volatile before. And so we have, in the past, we had a lot of independent operators that completely owned all the livestock, owned all the corn, owned all the beans, and then fed it out. But because of the marketplace being volatile at times, at this point, we have a lot more contract feeding going on in certain segments. Contract feeding in the hog business because it was volatile before. So a producer that has a hog site can guarantee himself X dollars.
Who takes the contracts? The feeding companies, the slaughterhouses, who?
They actually do a lot of contract. Yes, the JBSs of the world, the Smithfields of the world.
IBP, Tyson.
IBP isn't. Tyson is. IBP is no more. Yes.
So that's so with the local Iowa farmer, he's just contracting out, so he knows he's going to make a buck.
On the hog business, I just
Hogs.
talked. Yeah.
Not cattle.
Cattle is not very normal to have that. Correct.
Okay.
Here. But so going back, I went through a transition in my lifetime of a lot of independent, smaller farmers, like we described. I was growing up on.
Yeah.
You had to make transitions. You've made transitions in your real estate business, and everybody makes transitions all the time. And so people owning the sites and the actual farms in Iowa are still 98% family owned.
Really?
Very high percentage. Now, is JBS or Smithfield family owned? No, that's a different business. That's a packing business. That's different. Is Cargill family owned? Well, kind of, but different people that process or condition seed, they are not family owned any longer. So we still have the base business in Iowa. Farmers, family farms still own the ground.
But there's fewer farmers.
There are much fewer farmers.
Way fewer.
Right.
But I just, somehow I had it in my head there'd be more corporate farms.
No, it's not an efficient situation. Remember, you're on an annual crop basis for crops, and so you have very extensive times you need to be running hard, and others you don't. And that's not a real good plan for a corporate situation. If you want to employ a bunch of people, you want them busy all year round.
Right.
And so it doesn't fit the program to have a corporate situation having a farm. Now, that doesn't mean that large farmers aren't using employees. They are. But they're trucking during that time. They're taking care of livestock during that time. They're diversifying their program. But they are family farms working in production agriculture.
So the good news is in Iowa, 98% are owned by families.
Yes.
So let's talk about, we've been around for a while, 70s, 80s. Let's talk about, I wouldn't call that the old days, but it's quite a ways from now or in the past, what it was like for the farming community. And I know in Iowa, football helmets, they have America Needs a Farmer that Hayden Fry put on. Let's talk about that. What went on in like the 80s with interest rates when they were so high. I think housing got as high as 15% or something. I mean, I think my first mortgage was 9 and I was having a conniption fit at 9. 15 might have been higher than 15. So talk about what went on in the ag community in those high interest rate environments in the 80s.
In the 80s, I personally owned a couple of farms and was involved, as a younger guy, thinking I was going to win the big war and do everything, fast and furious by my 20s. In the 80s, anything you touched in agriculture, you went backwards.
Yeah.
Period. Money was being borrowed at 16%. 16%. It's a number that's unfathomable today.
Yeah.
When Ronald Reagan was the president, my brother actually did some lobby work for the corn growers at the time. And the numbers that I remember was that of the net farm income, the net farm income, almost 100% of that net farm income came from price supports because you could not, prices were so low and production cost
Right.
where they were, and interest where it was at. Mr. Stockman kept raising the interest rate to kill inflation during the Reagan times, and anybody borrowing money or quote unquote doing something, it was impossible to do something to make a living. And so in production agriculture, the 80s were a lost decade.
Wow.
Anything you did in the 80s were a lost decade for you.
So in the 80s, if you had your ground paid for and you had your equipment paid for, you could eke out a living. But if it were a farmer starting out and you had to borrow money to buy the ground or buy your equipment, you were done.
Correct.
You're basically done.
Done.
And I think that's why Hayden came up with that America Needs a Farmer, because a lot of those guys are going out, and it hurt them substantially. And if it wasn't a family farm where they could pass down the dirt and not have a lot of debt, you were just strangled, weren't you?
You were strangled, and anything innovative, anything that, production agriculture is cash intensive.
Right.
So anything needing cash and any borrowing of cash, it didn't work.
So here you are, you got your dirt paid for, you got everything paid for, you go to the bank, you start leveraging everything just to make a living, and then all of a sudden you're paying that kind of interest and you're in a centrifugal wheel. You can't get out of it. And then crop prices were low. Corn was what, $2.50, $3 a bushel?
Or less.
Beans were $5. It's like, yeah, that's really sad. And I think that's what was sad about it. There was a lot of pain in the ag community, and thankfully, we're out of that. But it was a tough time.
Yeah, right now our debt to asset ratios in ag are quite low, but those are general numbers. Everything, you look at total overall production numbers, total numbers, it always looks better. Individual growers, individual people do have debt. Everything's different for each farmer. But in the times of the 80s, anything you did as a young, innovative person, if I would have gone back and farmed with my father, I would have put him under.
Yeah. Because why? You build hog confinement houses?
I would have done, stuff to
expand it,
yeah.
rented more ground,
Right.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but
Tried to made it larger, make it.
before two people could live off of it. And the
Right.
answer was, I never had a desire to go back and farm. I like farming, the actual nuts and bolts of working on machinery and getting your knuckles all busted up. That was not a thrill for me, Gary.
Yeah.
So,
Farmers are busy all the time. I don't know a lazy farmer. There's always something to do. You're always doing something. You're either working on equipment, you do the crops, and when they go hard. They go day and night, harvesting, putting their crops in.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, that's a work ethic that the country was founded on, is the farming and the ag community.
they're always looking for innovative things, and that's what we'll talk about a little bit more of what's going to happen in the future. But, historically, people my age, the 80s for the ag production people was like the 30s for other parts of the country.
Yeah.
It's made me what I am today because it was so scary in the 80s just being able to hang on.
But also a touch, I'm sure your dad touched of this when you were a kid. You learned how to work, didn't you? Made fence, baled hay.
Everything.
Whatever you did, got up early. There was no easy life in a farming and ag community.
Well, in our case, we always fed the cattle and things before when I was going to school. And a little story that you might find interesting, at the beginning of the school year, my dad took out several pieces of paper that could fit in my wallet, wrote Wayne C. Tank, and left it blank on the top. He looked at me and said, go to the East Place, feed the cattle before you go to school. If you have problems, you need to go to the secretary at the school office, and I want you to put down why you were late. And I think he might have talked to the secretary, but I would go in, and I had band first, and I was terrible at band, but I was a band person. And I would go in, and I said, I'm late. I smelled like cattle manure, but I would write down something, and she would say, no, not good enough story. And so I actually made up stories, was held captive by the cattle in the hay lot or something like that, or I got stuck in the mud and had to escape. And she would then put those notes in my personal file, But that was a farm community. She understood that I had to feed cattle first before I came to school.
Can I get a copy of that file? I'd just like to see it.
That would never happen today, Gary.
Right. No, I know.
That would never happen in Iowa City.
No.
But it did happen in Durant, Iowa.
Right.
Because they understood. They were a part of the farming community.
So we got high rates. We've got what happened to land values over the past? I know obviously they're a lot higher, but what was going on with land values back then?
In the 70s, the land values crept up because you could borrow money and at a cheaper rate than inflation was happening.
Right.
And so you just had land values going up. Best land probably selling for $3,000 or $4,000 an acre, going up in the 70s. In the 80s, we had interest rates creep up. The spread. Land values, 1986 was the low, 1986, February of 86 to be exact, because I remember it. And a lot of ground sold for $1,100 to $1,200 an acre in comparison to $3,000 or $4,000. So about a 60-something% retracement in the land values. People still want to own ground. People in the production agriculture, farmers buy land, machinery, and CDs. When their CDs have something, farmers can't help themselves. They're going to buy more machinery or they're going to buy land. Yeah. And people like my father didn't invest in the stock market. His definition of something different was an annuity. Yeah, wow. It's just
stock market's too risky.
But yet you're feeding cattle.
Yeah,
Gary.
yeah.
I mean, the oxymoron
it's
of
in your blood. It's in your blood. It's like you said.
They can't help it.
Right.
It's like being a real estate guy. You can't help it, Gary.
Yep. It's a sickness.
It's a sickness.
Yep.
So you know that well.
Yep.
And so, go back to the story. Basically, we had land values go down from the first part of 80s. Net income terrible, bottoming out in 86. My dad bought a farm in 87. The bank terms were 10% interest, no prepayment, principal and interest paid off in over 10 years, plus 50% down, Gary.
Wow.
That's what was happening. So people with cash, you talked about people that had paid off your farms.
Right, yep.
Guess who was buying some of that?
They were buying farms.
Yep.
And then the neighbors, of course, when a farm comes for auction, it's all the neighbors, right? I mean, why wouldn't they want to acquire more around their current existing farm?
They do, but investors drive a market. But I should take that back. Investors will basically support a market, but farmers drive the market because they're still the buyers. In the last several years, talking about land values, we've had some large investors buying land as offsetting some of their stock portfolios and things. So you do have, in Iowa and Illinois, you do have some very large land people buying ground and accumulating thousands of acres. And so that made ground more scarce. And so we have seen the last 7 to 10 years land values increase quite a bit more because people are putting chunks of dollars into a different asset like land. And so we've had 2 or 3 things happen in the land market, and we'll digress here a little bit. We've had farmers wanting to buy ground, just like you talked about. We want investors trying to balance their portfolios. And then uniquely enough, recreational ground has gone up.
Crazy.
Yeah. If you want a place to hunt in Iowa, it's $5,000 an acre, Gary.
Yeah.
For it lays outside with trees.
Or more.
Yeah. And it's a super strong market for that. It's not like it's going to go down.
And there's hunting groups that come in and buy it.
Yes.
And then they set up hunts.
Yeah.
And all it's got is a stream and some trees, and there's really nothing, no row crop.
I own a farm in Madison County with 3 other guys. We build a cabin.
Yeah.
We screw off there.
You just go and have fun and relax, and
Yeah. I hunt turkeys.
Yeah.
Hunt deer.
So in the farming world, you went from. So would you buy a farm today? I mean, let me go to another question when talking about buying ground. You said 98% of the farmers are family owned or farming operations. Who owns the ground in Iowa? Is it families? Is 70% or is it?
It's a lot of older ladies, quite frankly. It's a good amount. Over half the ground is rented from others too in Iowa.
Wow.
And so I'll tell you, go back a little story here, Gary. You talk about would I buy a farm today?
Yeah.
When I was in the 80s and the 20s, I bought 2 farms and lost them, or gave them back, properly said. And I vowed right there, because I'm an Aggie, I'm not going to put all my eggs in a basket like my father.
You're not going to buy dirt then.
I have some.
Yeah,
some.
But from the 80s, you're in your mind. You said I'm not going to go back and own a farm.
That's correct.
You're going to lease.
No, I'm going to put my cash. I do crop insurance and management, and I have funded my things in the stock market.
Oh.
I am doing things that aren't directly related to agriculture
Right.
because I got toasted in the 80s,
Right.
along with
Many people.
yes.
Numerous.
It didn't matter. If you were in the ag market, you got the grinder mixer. So I'm a little different. I had the opportunity to do it that way. But true farmers and farmers on the ground, when you're working with an Aggie, you're working with a farmer, most of them buy land, machinery, and CDs.
Yeah.
That's their definition of a diverse portfolio.
Yeah. Not that we want to spend a lot of time in the 80s, but I go back to Hayden had the sense to put America Needs the Farmers, which was a great idea he had.
Yeah.
Because in the 80s, you got low prices, you got high interest rate, you got ground values doing whatever going down, you got financial statements going from here to there down. It was a miserable time. I hate to even talk about it as I think about it here. We're talking about ag, but people in the state of Iowa that weren't in ag probably didn't realize that it was as bad as it was. But the Aggie community, it was awful for everybody.
Yes.
For anybody in ag, no matter whether you owned your ground, you didn't own your ground, and it was hard for the banks. It was hard for the state of Iowa.
Retail people.
Everybody. It affected the towns, the small towns, and then not only that, but just some guy getting out of Iowa State or wherever he went to school, and he wants to come home and farm. How do you farm? Because nobody was making any money. So thank God we made it through that.
Yes.
And we did, but people don't realize what the struggle was for the farmers in the 80s.
It was a agricultural depression similar to the 30s.
Yeah, the Dust Bowl or whatever. I mean, they went through it. So that's why it's been kind of exciting to me to see. We can get more into current time, but it's exciting to me to see prices are up. I mean, it's been great. Farmers are making some money. It's too bad diesel fuel's so high, but there's other factors. But when you think of a farmer, they have the ground, and they rely on Mother Nature. They rely on a lot of external forces like, what's the price of fuel, what's the price of fertilizer, which has gone crazy, and then the crop production and the amount per acre just blows my mind. Used to be that when I was a kid, like 150 bushels an acre for corn was like. Now isn't it like 250 or 2 1/4 or beans is 60, 70, 80? Anyway, it blows my mind of the type of production we have, and then. Maybe something else you want to talk about is we feed the world. The Midwest, Iowa, Nebraska, Minnesota, Illinois. I mean, people don't realize how much production. When I travel, and you travel too a little bit, when you go, you say Iowa, what do people think?
They think Idaho.
Or Ohio. Or Hawaii. Yeah. I get that thrown in. I go, well, not really.
Not really,
I mean, the corn isn't really blue. It's green, but in the ocean. But they have no idea what we do and produce. So that's why it's so exciting that, one of the things that a farm I have in Northeast Iowa, they got fiber optics coming. How cool is that? Because if you think of all the money generated in the ag community, and the farmers are huge, they're small businesses, but a huge part of our economy, they need internet, they need Wi-Fi.
It's a big deal. To
run their tractors. And then, I don't want to skip around here, but and I don't know if you want to get into innovation like John Deere, but they're out there running themselves now.
They are. I had a grower that I insure that was last year. I called him. It was during planting, and he was running his tractor. And he says, "Hey, I'll call you right back." And I said, "Why?" "This is the end of the movie, and I really like this part." Yeah. And I said, "So let me get this straight. You're watching your movie and your tractor and you're planting corn." I said, "Okay." He laughed at me. He says, "Don't tell anybody else." But there's so many things you could do with Wi-Fi and internet access and those.
And the innovation on a tractor, it's kind of like with the GPS and they know where they put the anhydrous last year, whatever they put out on nitrogen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's here, and you can see this and here the depth of the plant. I mean, it's extremely innovative. So when you think of farms, if you don't think it's modern, you're missing the boat. There's a lot of incredible technology that I see out there.
Even on organic people, auto steer, which when you're doing organic, you have to till quite a bit.
Yeah.
Auto steer keeps you within a half inch, and so you would think a guy doing organic would probably use old equipment, but
Yeah.
the truly good organic people are using highly sophisticated equipment with auto steer because you can't steer within a half inch, Gary.
Yeah, no.
And so
Yeah.
technology has taken over just tons of things, and it has to do everything from planting to conservation to efficiencies. Agricultural and farmers, like I said, remember there are three groups they're going to invest in. If there's that technology, Gary, for that better tractor,
Yeah.
they take their CD and they cash that baby,
Right.
and guess what? They buy that updated tractor.
Speaking of conservation, I want to get into that. Some people don't understand what CRP means. Maybe you can explain that. But I remember as a kid, we drove from, I think, Des Moines to Fort Dodge. And it was back when everybody plowed their fields in the fall. And it was in the middle of winter. And I looked across the fields, and they were like kind of a dark black or gray. And I'm going, what's that? Well, the dust would blow because they plowed the fields, and it would blow into the snow, and the snow looked like it was black. I'm like a soot color.
Right.
And I'm like going, what is that? Well, it was the dirt blowing around. Well, we quit doing that. And a lot of the fields are no-till. Can you kind of explain what no-till is and then get into conservation and CRP?
Mm-hmm. Again, this is a good question on production agriculture. When we were in the 90s, we had shoe planters, and a shoe planter is basically what you would use even in the 40s or 50s. It would just have an opening and seed drop in the middle, then you kind of cover it up.
Yeah.
We have had tremendous innovation, and not just John Deere. It'd be Kenzie, it would be Case IH. Our planting equipment is so superior to what it was before. We can plant into a gravel parking lot. It's unbelievable, the technology of these planters and the ability to place it at a proper depth. And so we have had a massive changeover of planting equipment. Number two, we have over-the-top herbicides. When I first started in the 80s and the 70s, our major herbicides had to be incorporated.
Yeah.
So incorporated means that if you had Sutan, which was a corn herbicide, you had to take your disc or spray it first, then disc or field cultivate it in. Right. So it had to be tilled into the soil. Almost all of our herbicides now are top applied or topically applied, and so they don't have to disturb the soil to properly work, which is a huge deal. Otherwise, they would disturb that soil, right, like you saw when you were out there looking at it. So we have tremendous innovations in the equipment business to be able to no-till, Gary. We have the herbicide, we have contact killers, and we have situations where we can put herbicides and nitrogens and things on the top. If we didn't have safeners for nitrogen, and so we had to incorporate our nitrogen into the soil, now we have nitrogen safeners that we can put them on the top. So we've had a ton of things going on that are super positive from a conservation perspective. Farmers use different combinations, different soil types. You can't make a general statement that farmers are doing X because we have a multitude of soil types in this state. Yeah. So everybody has a little different game they're doing. But it's exciting to me. I won the Conservation Award for farm managers in 1986. What did I do for that? And there was a prize with a dollar amount. But we were putting terraces on because we were plowing and tilling, like you talked about, Gary. And so the only way to do it was to have terraces at places so that you stop those rilling, those water from running down the hill. And we don't have near the terrace things now because we can plant directly into the bean stubble and the corn stalks now. And with the bigger equipment, we don't want to have rills or things in the field to be able to plant over top of the terraces. And so what was cool in 80s cutting edge in the 80s. We have a paradigm shift right now on conservation things that we have unbelievable planters. We have geo-referenced items for spraying that you can paint the map and know if you don't overspray. We have tractors that can almost think for themselves.
Right.
We have farmers, and they try hard. Some of this technology, they get so frustrated because if one thing doesn't work, they're sitting in the field. In 2019, my brother passed away, and my brother and I said that in 20 that we would plant the fields, plant the corn for him. And he had a decent John Deere planter, and it kept going on and turning off. And I called the technician, and the John Deere technician at Durant. I said, I can't get, every time it shuts off on me. And he says, where's your hand? I said, looked over, and I said, it's on touching the controls. He says, is the second one over? Is it flipped backwards? And I said, yeah. You must have hit that. That's the emergency switch to shut the planter off all the time. I said, I've been sitting here taking everything apart and putting it back together for an hour, and that's what happens. They're messing with things. They go, oh my God, I've wrecked my planter. Right. Is because they hit something, or their kid hit something, or they put their lunch down on something, and technology is wonderful, but it's super frustrating. Right. And a lot of farmers are my age, or in the 50s and 60s, and they're learning. Right. But it's tough, Gary. Yeah. It's
almost like a video game the kids play with today.
Well, they get it really well, but how are you at video games?
Terrible.
Okay.
I mean, so you have 5-year-olds out in tractors,
right.
Probably be better. So tell us what CRP, and let's go a little more into conservation. What's going on?
Well, Uncle Sam has a program. CRP is a Conservation Reserve Program.
Okay.
It's usually a 10-year contract. You end up planting it into native grasses. Okay. It's meant to be a conservation program for wildlife. Farmers get paid a competitive rent, usually slightly below a competitive rent to do that. On farms, on my family farm, my mom still owns, she's 94, but she has CRP on several different spots. There are conservation against streams. She has water buffers, as they call them, and that's the same concept. And so a lot of farmers use selective locations for CRP because obviously you don't want water heading directly from your field into a creek. There's a creek that we're putting buffer strip on. So it's an excellent program. We've seen pretty good use of it, probably, I think, 23 million acres in the U.S. It will stay for a while. It will be part of any government program. It's a good plan.
Well, it's basically taken ground out of production.
Marginal ground.
Yeah, that probably should be out of production, and you just preserve it like
Correct.
It used to be, natural prairie.
Right.
And that helps the streams, it helps the sediment, the runoff, everything. So, yeah, a lot of people don't understand what that is, but there's a lot of ground that's in CRP.
And it's a good program. It should be used in a combination of buffer strips along creeks, highly erodible marginal ground on side hills. Yeah, it's a good program. It's been around for a while. It will continue to be. It re-ups some are shorter-term contracts, but most are 10-year contracts that they work with.
So what's the future look like in ag? Because, we're a couple of old guys sitting here, and we've seen from that John Deere A up to now with the new equipment. Yeah. What's your thoughts on going forward? And maybe before we get into that, we hit a little bit on land values. Mm-hmm. So like you said, when we were kids, it was probably 3,000 or 4,000 acre was like unheard of, and that was good black dirt. And now I think the average, I could be wrong here, but I think it's 11 grand, 12 grand an acre for a decent farm. But
something spiking to 15,000.
Yeah, and then I hear when you get in northern Iowa, there's some dirt that Humboldt County and up by Fort Dodge North and in those Algona and in those areas that you're talking 20, 25 an acre.
Those are Dutch areas where you're talking.
Yeah. They must fight over the neighbors must say, they go, I want this ground, and they just pay whatever because it doesn't make any sense economically, does it?
No sense economically, but remember the three groups.
Right.
You just go back
CDs,
to
ground,
machinery, and so that's kind of crazy. Land will probably never go away, but to say it's going to appreciate double again would be silly.
Yeah.
Gary. It would be silly to say.
What's your
that.
return if I bought a farm? If you were talking to the listeners, say I'm going to go buy. Let's see, I know it depends on the dirt and all the soil. There's a lot of parameters, but can you make 3%?
It's hard.
Yeah. So the people want it because they want the diversity of their assets, possibly.
Yep.
Why they buy ground. Stock market's kind of like
They don't trust it.
a casino, maybe. Some people don't, whatever, but over time it's proven done well.
Correct.
And then dirt, just there's only so much of it.
And I managed farms over the years. There are certain owners, they get out of their car, they go out, stand on the ground, they go,
And wave.
I like this.
And then they leave.
But they like it. They understand it. They feel comfortable with it.
Right.
They have a lot of them have production agriculture backgrounds, and it's like they just love to go out and look at their property.
See the dirt, yeah.
And see the dirt.
Yeah. Lease it back, so it's simple.
Yes.
It's like a triple net lease on a commercial building. You just lease it back, you get a check, and maybe you feel like you're helping the farmer leasing it. Maybe it adds to his production.
There's family. There's history there. The whole ag thing is just different unless you've been involved with it.
Right.
And just think of that thought process of my father as a cattle feeder, but thinking the stock market is too risky.
Right.
Think that's just a concept that is bizarre, possibly.
When I was younger, when I was real young, I'd go to my uncle's farm every year up by Adel, Redfield area. Great farm, by the way. Brick buildings. I mean, that old day when the corn crib and the barns were brick. It's like you remember. Beautiful setup. And he always leased. And I said to my dad one time, I said, well, Uncle Glenn here, why does he lease ground? And my dad leased ground town. Nobody bought because they grew up in the Depression.
That's right.
So what people don't realize, the young crowd, is that Depression, there was no money. Nobody had any money. You took it out of the banks. There wasn't anything going on. And only the top 1% or quarter, I don't know who bought the ground then. They could buy the ground, but they leased to farmers. Had a lot of farmers around, but they never got to the point like you talk about where they'd even buy ground in the 60s, 70s, 80s. They would stay away from it. They'd just lease for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, and that was important to me when I said that I would probably diversify myself because of the shellacking I took in the 80s personally.
Right.
And having all your assets in a particular group, the group of the production agriculture.
Right.
You talked a little bit about what's in the future.
Yeah.
I think that there's some really exciting things in the future. First of all, because you can't find help, Gary, growers are substituting equipment for labor. Now, you have to understand that equipment, and when you're sitting in the field with me and my elbow was on the off switch,
right,
that could be unbelievably
frustrating,
beyond belief frustrating.
Yeah,
but these guys are mastering it. They have help, and so you're going to spread this equipment over more acres. So that means there's going to be competition for more acres. So in truly production agriculture, you're going to have lots of competition for this ground. Right. You said that they lease it, so there is competition for the ground. Some really cool things going on is I'm not trying to endorse Pivot Bio. This is the name, but it is a bacteria that they're putting on the corn that makes nitrogen. Huh. Now, you've heard of CRISPR technology over the last 10 years. CRISPR, you spell it with a capitals, CRISP/R. It's been in the human side for 10 or 12 years. But CRISPR technology is not inserting anything into genes, but rearranging the genes. We're doing it for Hodgkin's disease and some other things like that in humans. But in CRISPR technology, and I got to be a little careful here because I don't know all the details of this particular new technology of Pivot Bio, but that bacteria will make nitrogen in the ground because it's pulling it from the air and pulling from the soil. And so they are saying in the propaganda and in the information, which I know pretty well, they make 40 pounds of N by putting this bacteria on, and they've changed that bacteria. It used to stop making nitrogen, but because we've tweaked it with the CRISPR technology, it keeps on making nitrogen. And it's so cool because we can get nitrogen from the air instead of putting on nitrogen fertilizer.
Right. Save you a lot of money, I think.
It will. That's just one of many. There's seed treatments trying to get the biologicals, that classification would be biologicals. There is a ton of new biologicals coming that could be paradigm shifts for how we get our nitrogen, releasing P and K, soil tilth. It could be pretty interesting, all of which will increase yields, all of which will save money. Do we know exactly what that is right now? No, but that's the fun. That's the fun of trying to different things. And Practical Farmers of America have all kinds of different things out there right now looking at these quote unquote new technologies that they aren't shattering new technologies, but they're kind of cool. And farmers are looking at every opportunity to increase their efficiencies. And the most and best way to increase your cost, reduce your cost of production, is for the same inputs have more yield. You can't save yourself to prosperity in ag. You cannot save yourself. You have to have more yield to be able, so your cost per unit is less. And
Nitrogen's fertilizer, right?
Right.
That's what that. Some people don't know that. So let's go into you personally and talk about here to finish today. Let's talk about, you're on the farm. You're in Durant. You go to Iowa State. You learn majored in agricultural
animal science.
Science. Okay. Then what'd you do? And then how'd you get to ag risk insurance and manage farms? So tell me about your career path and what you were thinking and why you got into insurance, and then tell us a little bit about what you're doing today.
First of all, Gary, I'm unbelievably lucky. I am a lucky person.
You meant Sue.
Well, that's
true.
Yeah, that's number one. You know how that works.
Right.
So I worked for Hertz Farm Management for 8 years, and I managed farm properties for absentee owners, and they were out of Nevada. I lived in the Nevada Ames area for 8 years, and during that time, I bought 2 farms, and we had the discussion about the 80s, how wonderful they were, and how everything was negative, and during that time, I started doing more crop insurance for hybrid seed corn companies, and what happened, I have been talking to some of my farms I managed had hybrid seed corn on them, so I knew all the plant people for old names like Asgrow and Funks G, and Pioneer was one, but there was several other names in the area, and I knew that this new thing called crop insurance would be a good bottom side protection for their seed corn growers.
Right.
But at the time, everybody had a guarantee in their contract, and you couldn't have a guarantee and use crop insurance because that'd be double dipping. So along came the drought of 1988, and remember that's still a time when there was still a lot of government payments because prices were still low.
Yeah.
And so the seed companies had to take out their guarantees in their contracts, and I actually helped write into the Federal Register that crop insurance is not a guarantee, and they could buy crop insurance for their growers as a part of the bottom side protection plan.
So tell me about the guarantee of seed growers.
So the growers would say, this is almost laughable number, but during that time, the seed companies would guarantee them at least $270 to $300 per acre, no matter what happened, if they had a bad crop or not. So as a pseudo crop insurance program, they just had a guarantee to make sure that they could go to the next year. And so crop insurance was used. They would pay a premium for the crop insurance in lieu of having a guarantee. And so in a very short time, about the time my son was born, in 88, 89 time frame, I signed up all kind of seed companies at that time to go ahead and put a bottom side in their seed contract.
So you're insuring seed companies.
I'm insuring the growers of the seed companies.
The growers of the seed companies. I don't think a lot of people understand that most farmers, wouldn't you say, have crop insurance.
98%
Hail,
in Iowa.
Wind, drought, it just covers everything. So
Correct.
they're hedging that Mother Nature doesn't rain and it shrivels up. Right now, I know the hybrids and things now will tolerate way more, less rain, more rain, whatever all this goes on with Mother Nature. But so farmers are obviously good business people, and they're insuring their crops. So that's what you came up and figured out, and the rest is history. So
and then in the 90s we had a transition of technology changes, and some of the smaller seed companies, what I call mom and pops, would be family-run businesses, ended up selling out to larger groups. And so I went into the hog business, and we insure a number of finishing sites, like I talked about, finishing sites for hog sites because I do the hog business pretty well. And so they aren't owning the pigs; they just have the sites, and we insure tons of those 1 and 2 and 3 barn sites out in the
So
countryside.
you insure the buildings.
Just the buildings.
You don't insure the production. You don't insure how they handle the hogs or anything.
No, we do have some special things that if they would ever get sued for odor nuisance protection, for instance, odor nuisance, or we have a special policy for that. Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting.
So
ag risk insurance. So do you, if there's a hail swath through Iowa, do you go out and adjust it?
No.
Do you have adjusters?
Yeah, we can't legally do that we have adjusters from the company do those.
It's kind of like an appraiser in real estate. Somebody separate.
Yes, completely separate. Yep. I'm an agent, and I have some very professional adjusters. They're great.
So a farmer puts out X amount. He's got 1,000 acres of corn. Half of it's destroyed. The adjusters come in, and then at least he knows that, hey, at least I put out X amount. I'm not going to lose that.
Right. It's not a money making proposition. It's don't lose your keister.
Right. In other words, you're not going to make money by crop insurance, but you're not going to lose it.
Correct.
Good.
Yep.
Well, how's business been? Over the last 30, 40 years?
We've done really well. My son has come in about 11 years ago on the crop side, and we had a banner year this year. We continue to work with our core group of growers. There are less people in ag, but they're bigger, and you have to connect your star to the people that have bad transitions, people that have transitional plans. So their sons are farming, their daughters are farming. They don't want to talk to some old guy like me.
Right.
They want to talk to a younger man.
Yeah, right.
And so we have made those transitions. Production agriculture today is completely is very competitive, and I think it's pretty vibrant. One thing I want to transition a little bit on what's happening in the soybean market. Because we have the biodiesel contracts, and we're having, the government saying we have to have so much biodiesel for regenerative diesel. The number of soybean crush plants in the U.S. are just being built like crazy by a lot of people. And that means that just like in 05, 06, when we did the ethanol plants, now we're doing soybeans so that we crush the beans and get the oil to use for biodiesel usage. But we're going to have a whole lot of bean meal out here because you crush a bean, you make oil, and you make meal. The meal can be, in the old days, was always used to feed livestock. So we're going to have one more source of a cheap meal because we have so much more of it coming online here. It will make livestock feeding more competitive here in the Midwest. We want to value add everything we're possibly doing. To the days of sending our wheat or our corn or our beans to China as a whole thing, that doesn't make us any money here. We have to value add in this state. So people have jobs at crush plants, jobs in feed, farrowing facilities and finishing facilities. So production agriculture will be keyed to making any kind of rural situation vibrant. Shenandoah, Iowa has a massive plant going in. It'll be fantastic for the area to add value for the beans. And so you look in the future a little bit here in production agriculture. Everything's capital intensive. Everything is longer planting, 2 to 10 year planting kind of things. And I'm pretty excited about the future for my son or for other people being involved in production agriculture or insuring it or actually being involved because there are opportunities. It is difficult because you have to be smart, capital intensive wise, but there are opportunities to do things. And we have these new technologies coming on as that one example of that bacteria putting on corn that produces nitrogen. That is so cool. That is so neat. And we have other things. Innovation is still coming. That we're going to have other things that will be that cool with new innovations to have better soil health because we can change things.
Yeah, well, that's great. So do you have any competition at Ag Risk?
Oh, sure. Other people are. Yeah, sure. Other people are in crop insurance.
Yeah. So you have a little bit, but you kind of dominate, don't you?
Well, Gary, we would think that we're a little better product than other people, but other people, it's a competitive marketplace.
But where are you? How many states?
We work in Iowa. We have quite a bit of seed corn coverage in Nebraska because of the irrigation there. Illinois has some. We have a little bit happening in Minnesota. Nothing really in Missouri, but Iowa, Nebraska, and Illinois. Those are our big states.
Okay. Well, listen, Jack, this has been fun. I think we could probably talk all day about agriculture, but What's neat about what you're saying is that all the innovations coming out. I mean, I hadn't been in a tractor for I don't know how long, and I kind of remember a 40-20 and a 30-20 and A, B, and I was with a friend. It was like 5 or 6 years ago, and I got in there. I thought I was in a jet. I mean, I've never been in a jet either, but it was just a joystick. I mean, where's the steering wheel? It's just this little push button thing, and it's just amazing to me. So I think every day you get up, you got to be thinking, what else are they coming up with? Because it is exciting. So we live in a rural state. We live in a great state. You've heard of Iowa nice. That's so true. And you get a lot of that in the farming community in these rural towns. If you haven't experienced it, get out of here and go see it. Go to rural areas. They're great, great people, like the whole state of Iowa. And I think it's been fun to talk a little bit about agriculture, and that's our state. That's the foundation of our state. It's rural, it's agricultural, and it's a great state. So thanks a million for coming in. It's been fun talking about agriculture. Thanks, Jack.
You bet. Thank you, Gary.